Well, I want to be, fair enough. I want to be sensitive to everybody's time, and certainly appreciative of Nicole setting this up. This is a lot of fun for us. It's fun because we get to have those connections with you folks, but it's a challenging time. I don't need to tell you that. And what we're going to really talk about today is how to endure during this challenging time from a marketing perspective. And we're really going to highlight a lot of the best practices, things that many of you folks are doing already. But for those who aren't, there's some really low-hanging fruit that could be of benefit. And I hope that with this forum, where we've got video and non-video participants, we can use the chat on the side, or people would feel comfortable talking with their peers by unmuting their microphone and submitting their question or asking the group. So before we get started, is there anything, Nicole, that you'd like to add?
Sorry, it takes me a second to navigate to back to the screen. No, I just wanted to thank everybody for jumping on the call and remind them that we will have this available after the fact recorded. So if you ever need to reference it, or if you have questions that maybe you want to go back and rewatch it, you're welcome to do that. And thanks, Scott, again for leading these. And if you guys ever have ideas for future webinar topics, feel free to get those to me and I'll do my best to get those coordinated for you.
That's awesome, Nicole. A good resource, and Nicole and her team for all of you folks. So again, thanks for letting us present this. And you're going to see some familiar faces in here. I always like to bring in examples, best practices that your area is really showing. So don't be bashful or shy when it comes to being proud of the work that I display on screen that might be yours. And also, I wasn't able to get to everybody today with respect to examples, but know that there are a lot of best practices out there that are being recognized, even if they're not on screen today. If there's something too that you'd like to share, feel free to interrupt the conversation in the presentation. This is more informal than formal, and we want to make this a resource that's really valuable for everybody. All right. Hey, Randy. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to share my screen. If you'd hold on just 1 second. All right. You should be able to see my screen now, maybe with me as a mini me up in the right-hand corner. I'm going to keep my chat window alive over here just to make sure that I'm catching anything. Is everybody able to see the screen okay? Are there any questions about the video or the
Yeah, pretty much.
Sorry, it looks okay?
Looks good.
Okay. Let's go ahead and get started. Just 1 second.
Over there in the left corner by the garage door, you have to unplug that extension cord.
All right, so here we go. Extension cords and all. So I don't need to bring this headline up, but I feel like it's important for us all to level set. How many times have we seen this in the last 3 months? Nielsen continues to provide reports to the industry that just talk about how the off-premise is killing it right now, but the on-premise is suffering. They're not only talking about restaurants, they're talking about tasting rooms and facilities like yours. Now, what we really want to do, and most importantly, focus in on this conversation, is how we can turn the conversation in your direction and start to make up some of that ground with, again, some marketing that doesn't always cost money. It just takes time and investment. So let's dive into what we're going to get after today, which is understanding ourselves with respect to our competitors. So you know what you're capable of from a winemaking perspective. We really want to take an objective look at how you're marketing that fantastic wine, and also in the context of your competitors. Sure, your peers and your friends and a lot of the people on this call, you work together side by side, you might even be neighbors. However, you're still competitors at the end of the day, and it's not wrong for you to want to grow your business in this weird environment. I think we should all keep that in mind as we go through it, because like the last time, we're always pushing for 3 new customers for every existing customer. And it's ambitious, it's aggressive, but at the same time, it's really about survival now, not just pandemic wise, but to be an enduring brand. Again, the idea of brand stamina. How do you stand up? 3 customers for every current customer is what we always set our sights on. So today we're going to accomplish 3 very specific things, which I referenced at the email. We're going to talk about scorecards, and call it whatever you will. It's really an objective measure of what you're doing right and what opportunities you have. And we're going to specifically look at the marketing. And we're going to talk about COVID, because it's impossible to take COVID out of the conversation right now. And so while we wish the situation was different, we acknowledge that we need to continue to market our products during COVID. And those that do stand an upside that others don't. And then again, those niche opportunities. When you understand your competitors and you understand where you stand in that peer group, then you're a little more strategic and more prepared to carve out a niche and really go after a new market or a new customer that they're not. So, you know me, for those of you new to these sessions, again, I found them very valuable. I work for a company called Market Your Craft, and we really are a nationwide network of experts in storytelling, and it's fun for us. We work in wine, spirits, beer, other fermentables, and we like to help people tell their stories, because stories are helping them to differentiate and create sales right now. I've also worked for a couple fun companies that have been really icons in beverage and non-beverage. Which brings me to my latest project. So I bought a Montepulciano kit that I'm going to do this week. The one that I did before, which you remember, I did the Chilean Malbec, and I'm just about through those bottles. So it's about time for me to get after it again. But I want to bring everybody's attention to this really quickly, because I believe that part of differentiating your story is connecting with the home winemaker community. And to a certain extent, a lot of us started out there, and we've got those stories about starting in their basement, and this is fine. To the extent that you can elevate the aspirations and also the interest level of hobbyists, then you get people not only more interested in your product, but they dig deeper into why they should care. Why are you different from your neighbor? Well, it's because you're giving them a behind the scenes that they don't get from anybody else. And that's cool for that level of winemaker, right? The aspirational winemaker, where we all were at one point. I use this as an example. I don't know that I would ever own a winery, but it gives me an interest and it gives me a passion with a hobby that extends to retail. And so I visit as many wineries as I can, because I want to see how each of them do it differently. So keep that in mind. It's important that we connect with the home winemaking community, I believe. What we went over the last time, just to level set, was really creating a digital blueprint. You can call it what you will, but you basically got as a team the blueprint for making yourselves discoverable on digital, social, websites, public relations, media. We talked about all of it. The storefront where you're able to, and most of you use either a service like Vino Shipper or you've got your own, you've got a storefront, so you're able to sell the wine and ship in most cases. So you got the tools that you needed. And so we could just stop right here and say, okay, great, go after it. But what if everybody's doing the same thing? And I believe this is the challenge right now. It's not that everybody's using best practices. There's always a runway. There's always people doing things a little better than others. So you could always up your efforts. But if everybody's taking the same approach right now, then that means we have to do something just that much better and stand out. So when we take a look at that scenario, you can't help but just like, okay, how do I start? Where do I go? And you would insert your own expletive there. Whatever's going through your mind right now, I can feel it because it's highly competitive. It's a pandemic. It's like everything's stacked up against you. However, again, the low-hanging fruit is the really simple, straightforward ways that you can stand out. And we're going to bring these examples back up just to level set again for everybody. Having a mobile site, right? This doesn't necessarily mean a mobile app. It means, is your website mobile friendly? And do you say most of your message? Do you tell most of the story on the homepage? Is it full of personality? Do we have the opportunity to engage with your brand? Do you use lifestyle photos? Now, all of those things are very important, and many of which you see perhaps on a site like the Buchanan House. Beautiful site, well done, on desktop, on mobile, highlights the product. So this is a great example of a winery that's focused in on the offsite experience, drawing people to the winery as a customer only by giving them the information they need to see themselves sitting at one of the chairs inside the winery by looking at the website. It's a beautiful story, well told. Now, I would recommend, of course, using a secure certificate. Some of the site isn't secured, and so there's always opportunities, but this is a great example of a mobile-friendly site. We talked about press releases and industry news. And what's important to know about this again is if you have a list of media contacts in your area, this is free advertising. I'll say it again, it's free advertising. It takes time, and sure, it takes that one time when you put together your template for a press release, but all of these things are very standard. You don't need to be a writer or a journalist to understand it. A lot of people, a lot of wineries aren't sending out press releases when they have news to say. So we always say, go ahead and tell people when there's something newsworthy, like Lazy Acre, for example. This is a really well done website, and at some point in time, they recognized that they were going to need to add a reservation system. And many of the websites have taken a similar approach. How do I handle these people? How do I handle a reduced capacity, a closed indoor seating area, only open outdoor seating, at a distance? All of these variables, well, good on them for recognizing when they did. We can enable this on our website. We can streamline it for our team. This is press worthy. Now, I don't believe I don't believe that they used a press release. However, I would, sorry, Nicole had a question. However, I would send out a press release saying that we are now accepting reservations for our outdoor patio area. This is a great opportunity for you and your small group dining together or tasting together to enjoy a beautiful evening of music on the patio. Whatever that is, you can play these two events together, the reservations, the events, the patio being open. All of these things are very newsworthy. All right, just one second.
Okay, Scott,
Yeah.
this is Nicole. Okay, here's my question. And this is something that I struggle with too. And hoping you can talk a little bit about it, but what are some best practices on putting together your media list and ensuring that it's accurate? Because I even struggle with this just because of the turnover in reporting.
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you for asking. Again, for everybody's benefit, how do you really manage a media list and making sure that it's accurate? And I would start with what you know. What you know is that when you opened, you had 10 media outlets that all asked for interviews and photography. When you opened a second location, when you announced a new award-winning release, when you won a medal at a recognized competition, the press went after stories like that, especially at the local level. So start with those journalists, writers who've covered you in the past. Reach out to them and just introduce yourself and say, I believe you covered us on this story. Are you still covering this area? Would you mind in the future if I sent you a press release for a noteworthy event at our winery? And then expand from there. You start to see in the local TV space, reporters who are interested in the local story. You see it on TV every night. Well, make a mental note of that reporter who seemed to be sensitive to and hyper-focused on the success of the local small business, and reach out to them with that very same intro. And then lastly, there are definitely ways to get a hold of lists of press release professionals or professionals willing to take a press release, whether that's on the radio, the television, or the online newsletter space. I would start with those publications that you yourselves read or visit online, and then just do a little bit of digging into the contacts for those particular publications. Does that help, Nicole?
Yeah, thanks. I just
Yeah.
didn't know, like, yeah, no, that helps a lot. Thanks.
Well, yeah, and great question. So I like at least 20. Recently, I helped a brewery launch, and for its grand opening, I sent out a press release to 465 media outlets. Now, that's overwhelming, and we didn't get that much response, to be sure, but we got 20 qualified responses and 10 interviews out of it. Where did I get that list? It was a combination of guild and association membership, and they curate a list on behalf of local breweries, similar to the resources that you have available. However, a lot of the information, as Nicole said, was kind of outdated. And so we got a lot of bounces, but when you get 10 interviews for a grand opening in reputable magazines, publications, and television stations, it's a win. Free, right? So we like Lazy Acre this way. Reservations are definitely newsworthy. All right, content is so important, and we spent a lot of time last time. It's hard to believe it was April. We spent a lot of time last time talking about just how important content is and how the content that you post on your socials, on your website, actually are very reflective of your personality, tone, and brand. And to separate the two is doing both just a disservice, because everything that you say and do reflects who you are as a business, and this is how people are buying nowadays. They're aligning with businesses that share their same values and their same personalities. So have some fun with it. We like this from Soldier Creek. It talked about a watch party for last night's virtual happy hour. Now, it was clever. It was different. There's a little bit of a teaser in there. Now, what did Megan and the team do right here? Well, it's creating an event. Excuse me. It's creating an event out of, and content for that event out of something that's already happened, and having a little bit of fun with it. This is the low-hanging fruit that everybody has access to, right? But Soldier Creek and others are taking advantage of it. We talked a little bit about socials from a Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter perspective, and we're going to get into this a little bit more too, just about how we can be a little more strategic. We seem to like Fireside's work, a lot of video, and what we need to remember, and what we bring up later in the presentation too, is that video is almost as easy as photos to take. So we just need to take a little bit, we need to take a little bit of time to make sure that you're balancing out the beautiful staged photographs like this, which is great, with the raw behind the scenes. It doesn't need to be perfect. Put together a 5 or 10 second video from your phone. Either you post it yourself or have your team post it. This is what people want to see. People want the transparency and the authenticity. All right. Online sales, again, Vino Shipper or other services, a homegrown e-commerce service. It's important. It's important to, especially nowadays, to have as many sales channels going for us as possible. We also like mapping retail points, and there are a number of different ways to do that. WordPress users, there are a couple like StorePoint rather, that we really like, that allow you to map it out visually. The end goal is to make it as easy as possible for your customers to get their hands on product, and making a website without an accurate list of all of the retail distribution points seems like a mess. Mapping that out makes it even more approachable. So Vino Shipper is, again, a great service to use. We have to remember that everybody, or a lot of people, use this. And so how does a winery stand out when they're using Vino Shipper? Well, it's how they present it within the page. It's the information they make available about the particular wines. It's taking full advantage of the service for what it's worth, and giving the customer the best information possible so that they can make that purchase decision. So again, a good example. And the last one, just again as a recap of last time, but to level set us for this time, is email. And email is very important, and it's not dead like we talked about. A lot of the wineries are using emails for a periodic newsletter, or maybe specials or promotions, or order by this date kind of limited time offers. And that's fine, but just remember that your customers aren't always going to want to be sold to. They're going to want to be included. And so use the emails as opportunities for telling your brand story in addition to selling. All right. Any questions before we really get into the meat of it? Are we doing okay? Vino Shipper. Yeah, good question. So my understanding is that Vino Shipper is a service that you basically have a cloud account. You submit your wines and the particular data points, including descriptions, images, ABV, and then you associate a retail channel, whether that's only available for purchase on site or at least pick up on site or curbside, or you have a certain number of states that you'll have the reciprocity with so that you can ship to those states. So if that's very, very high level. Yeah, and Nicole shared with everybody. Ah, perfect. Yeah, it looks like Nicole has shared with everybody the IWGA specific landing page.
Yeah, I worked with them. I don't remember, maybe March, April. It was early on, and they had done this for other states as well, to put together state-specific, like marketplace type pages. So this would be all Iowa products, not necessarily just Iowa wine. Like if you scroll down, depending on how you have it sorted, you'll see like Ackerman has a lot of their like other things like glassware and different things like that. So, and you can sort by producer and all that, but it's a pretty cool tool, I guess, for people to search through.
Yeah, that's awesome. Joanne, if you have other questions, happy to answer those. Also, there are probably a number like Ackerman and the group who could provide maybe some insights of specifically the good, the bad, the ugly, maybe if you're looking to get into it. All right. So it seems like a lot, right? We just went through 6 areas that represent best practices for a winery. And we talked about websites and press, content, social, digital, storefront, email. I'm sure everybody's swimming to a certain extent. Well, how can I prioritize these things when I have a business to run? I don't necessarily have a bench strength of marketers working with me or for me. I wear a lot of hats. I do it myself. Well, I completely get it, which is really why we take a look at it and prioritize. And we would encourage you to do the same thing. This is hard to see, and you'll get a better copy of it when I send the materials afterwards, but we like to use a scorecard. Now, for those sports fans out there, a scorecard could be your golf game, or it could be the ball game, your kids' baseball, soccer match. It's a means of keeping track of what's happening on the field. Now, when you look at it that way, okay, it's pretty simplistic, but how does it relate to me? How does it relate to Soldier Creek, Ackerman, Fireside, any of these examples? Well, we would suggest that every so often you just have to keep yourself in check. And it doesn't take a long time, and it's not like you're beating yourself up. You don't have to be critical. You just need to understand where you are with respect to where you're going. And that's the same for business. It's the same for production and volume. It's the same for your staffing. It's the same with every aspect of your business. We're just asking you to take a look at it from a marketing viewpoint and say, okay, here's where I am right now, and here's why I know that I need to be. We call that a scorecard. And if we were to take a look at the 6 areas that we just mentioned, I could look objectively at any one of your sites, and I could give you basically a score on, in my framework, how well you're doing against where I think you could be. And I'm just encouraging you to do the same thing. This whole conversation is not meant to be some scary science social experiment, right? It's more so meant to just highlight that if we take a little bit of time right now, or if you take a morning with your coffee, or if you take a staff meeting and you really just ask some of these questions, then it's going to get you thinking more strategically about your business from a marketing perspective. And I am 100% sure that the more you think about it, the more you're going to identify opportunities that you could knock out yet today to become immediately more discoverable to a new customer who hasn't seen you. Okay, I'm gonna step back from my soapbox here for a second, but everybody gets the energy and the passion, because this is stuff that you don't have to buy. This is stuff that you just do yourself. It's just a matter of time, and I know time is in short supply. I get that. So what is this? It's small type. Scott, I can't see this. Joanne's on her iPad. She's like, that just looks like a blur to me. So, we get into it. On the left side of this scorecard is basically the 6 areas that we just talked about. Designing for mobile, industry news, content, social, storefront, email. Okay, you get it. Do you check the boxes? Is your site mobile friendly? Is it easy for a consumer who's never met you before to know what your story is? Does your homepage do most of the heavy lifting? AgeGate, actually, there were some good examples of AgeGates out there. Anyways, you go through and you check the boxes on whether or not your site and your efforts accomplish that. Easy enough, right? And then you score it. Now, if you were to just stop here, maybe you wouldn't need to score it, because a score helps you compare yourself to somebody else. A score is for comparison purposes. Nobody's ever going to be 100%. However, the way I've weighted these things, for me, it's going to be different for you. The way I've weighted them, I'm a 52 on about 114 scale. I'm less than 50%. Now, if that doesn't wake you up for a hot second to think, well, okay, I probably could up that number. There's some things that we just haven't focused on. And wow, I took this video the other day. I don't know why I didn't put it up on the socials. These are the things. It's just meant to kind of awaken that marketer in all of us, so that we can see the opportunities in our day-to-day business to attract new customers, right? 3 for every current one that you have. Okay. So no 2 cards are going to be exactly the same. Mine is not going to be like yours. It's not going to be like Gerard's. There are opportunities for you to make this scorecard to be whatever is useful and valuable to you and your team. You have to think like a customer, though, and this is so hard for people. We're so invested. This is your baby. You've poured your heart and soul, and chances are good, most of your finances into this thing. So how can you realistically take a step back? You have to start thinking like a customer. You have to think about someone who's never met you and how you can attract them. What do they want? Track it over time, make sure it's actionable, and share it with your team. You're going to see in the bottom of some of these slides, we have URLs that you can use, resources free to you that you can jump on our site and help you to walk through this in a little more detail. All right, so how this plays into COVID-19 is, I could have stopped with our presentation in April, giving you a presentation today about, okay, here's the scorecard for what we talked about in April. Let's see how you fare. COVID has thrown a big monkey wrench into every aspect of marketing, because in a lot of ways, not only has the retail environment changed, but consumers' relationships with brands and what they expect from brands, the transparency, the engagement. Imagine pre-COVID, somebody saying Zoom was going to be the next hottest web app. It's because literally everybody needed it when COVID hit to stay in touch with brands, to stay in touch with families. Okay, so the point is that COVID is not over, and in a lot of ways, we might be right in the middle of it. I certainly hope not. However, you have to think differently about marketing your brand during a pandemic. And if you can market successfully through this, I'm quite certain you probably can market through anything. So here's what we like about marketing during COVID. Supporting the front line is so important. Keeping that calendar of events, like we saw the virtual tasting and then the watch party after the fact, writing a press release, linking to an updated procedures page. How weird it is for me as a consumer to go to a winery website that doesn't have any sort of COVID page. Because if I were to visit, what do I need to do? Do I need to call them in order to make sure they're open? And then I have 5 questions that I usually ask about safety and distancing. Do I need to do that over the phone? Why not have a page to do that? But so few beverage alcohol producers took the time to actually do a page. Updating your business hours just sucks. It's awful, especially with all the changes handed down by the governor over time. Well, those people who are trying to find you for the first time are looking elsewhere other than your website. And so you gotta play the game with Yelp, and you need for breweries, Untapped, and other different services out there. The high visibility ones should always be up to date. Targeting your social posts, and then we'll talk a little bit about accessibility. I don't need to tell you that the frontline workers have been superhuman during all this, and I certainly have all the respect in the world. Whenever I have the opportunity, I try and show them my appreciation, but I'm just an individual. Businesses like wineries, breweries, and distilleries have really stepped up their efforts to collectively support these groups. And all I'm saying is, if you do, then let people know about it. And if you haven't yet, it's completely a personal decision for sure. However, you may want to consider the reciprocal effect it'll have on business when you, selfishly speaking, when you support the community supports you. So consider monies, donations. Doesn't have to be monetary, it's time, resources, just acknowledgement. We've seen a lot of customer donation online, whether that's meals that you can buy through a winery website, or again, partnership with a third party that enables such a service. It's cool. The calendar of events is hypercritical now, because the last thing that you want is for somebody to visit your events page and say all events have been canceled. Now, that may be true if you were highly dependent on an on-site event schedule, then I get it. You probably had to cancel a lot. But you could also think creatively. And what's the online tasting, paid or otherwise, that you can do? The virtual tour, the content that we don't think anything of, that customers who are stuck at home or in some sort of hybrid learning environment with their children, and they crave some sense of normalcy, give them something that puts a smile on their face, if not for just 6 minutes. I don't know if anybody has any creative ideas that they've found to work. Feel free to share those in the chat window with your other participants. It's valuable. We talked about press releases before. Press releases are even more valuable right now. And this is just an example. I'm not a PR guy. However, I found a press release template online that I was able to modify to fit my needs. And it has the standard contact information, an attention grabbing headline, 2 or 3 paragraphs worth of meat with a couple quotes, and then a boilerplate at the very bottom that just tells people who you are and gives them a link to the website. Now, if you've never written a press release before, this is literally all you have to do, and it's free. So to Nicole's question before, if you had 15 individuals who contacted you when you first opened and you still have their contact information, or if you know the guy or the gal at the local news station, and again, they're pretty keen on local stories, success stories, send them the press release, give them content. Writers want content. They might not feature you in the 6 o'clock news tonight, but maybe 10 o'clock tomorrow because they needed a feel-good story to counterbalance all the junk that's happening in the world right now. So again, politics aside, things are weird. Journalists and writers need content. Your content that's newsworthy is a perfect local news story that they will follow. You just need to tell them. And the reason for a press release is this is how they consume the content. This is formatted in a way that they can quickly decide whether or not they want to tell your story. I'm sure you get that. Again, this was just kind of odd to me, but we didn't see a lot of procedure pages. And this is so straightforward. Just what are you doing? How has your operation changed? We put together a sample, and that's up on our website, but it covers about 20 different areas that could potentially have been affected procedurally, operationally, audience or customer wise, to go ordering, things like this. Just put that page up on your website, or grab the one that we put together and make it your own. Steal it. It needs to be up on your website if it's not already. And it needs to be linked appropriately. It doesn't have to be splashy, you know, here's the starburst on the front page, how we're handling COVID, but it needs to be accessible. So make sure that the people who would otherwise call you or ask you on the socials or try and figure it out for themselves, make it very easy for them to see themselves having a drink at your winery, because you're providing a safe environment for them. I hope that makes sense. I don't mean to beat up that topic, but again, the low-hanging fruit just seems like a win. Updated business hours. I think I indicated before, I'm not a big fan of Yelp. It's a pay-to-play. It's kind of a racket. To a certain extent, you have to play it, and people know that. But the point is that whatever you think of Yelp, there are highly visible, kind of medium visibility and lower visibility areas where you know that your business hours live. And to the extent that you can keep those up to date, it's really important, because the last thing that you want is for a new customer who gets really excited to visit, and they try and figure out why or when, and they go to the wrong site that has out-of-date information. Targeting social posts. A lot of you folks are already doing this, but for those of you who aren't, again, maybe we could, yeah, Yelp. Somebody's not happy with Yelp. I feel you. It makes sense. So targeted social posts are important because organically, we're not really growing that much right now. There are some anomalies, but you may start to see some of your traffic for fans and followers on your social channels kind of dying off, or the growth that you were experiencing pre-COVID is kind of tapering off or even declining. And you think, well, why is that? I'm spending the same amount of time. Well, it's an indication that maybe your posts aren't engaging enough. And that's not being critical. It's more so just a fact. There's a balance between beautifully staged product shots with lifestyle content and behind the scenes. And to the extent that you can get that formula right with all three, then you're going to continue to maintain that engagement. Sprinkle in some video there, right? The things that you were taking for granted potentially before, now you have to be hypersensitive to. But then there's a point where even that's not growing your base. You're only talking to the same people, at which point boosting might be necessary. So budgeting a little bit for Facebook or an Instagram boosted post, once you see one that's tracking pretty well, getting some good engagement, it's important because it helps you reach new audiences. And you know this, I probably don't even need to say it, but it's worth mentioning that you can target the city over, or if you're right there on the Iowa border, then you can target, crossover to a certain extent. Just look at who you can target with each of those vehicles, and you can see how specific you get into gender, you get into age ranges, the behavioral stuff like enjoys visiting a winery. This stuff exists. It's a little scary, but we need to use it to our advantage. And you don't need to spend a lot of money to broaden the scope of your social efforts. Hope that makes sense. All right, and lastly, recently we did a deep dive into this, and we thought it was an appropriate time to really take a look at website accessibility. And we went down the rabbit hole of trying to understand any ADA regulations, similar to when you put that new wing on your winery or you expanded your tasting room, and you had to be very conscious from a construction perspective of any ADA requirements or regulations. But the same doesn't necessarily apply to websites. The current guidelines don't explicitly give businesses direction on what their websites should do or how they should function. If you're sensitive to this audience, and I think we all should be, then you really can take some small measures for adding turnkey solutions to your website that allow for accessibility for everybody's benefit. Tools that will increase or decrease the font size, or change the colors, or pause the video for those who are visually impaired. And not everybody processes obviously the same way. And so to the extent that you can be the website for all audiences, it expands. You become the go-to for audiences that you may not have even considered in the past. Not that you were separating, it's just now you're more inclusive. So the same way we think about providing customers of all types with the information they need to make a quick decision on whether or not to visit, let's give all audiences the same opportunities to enjoy your wine. All right. Oh, thank you. Yeah, appreciate that, Megan. All right, so we go back to the scorecards because the last piece of this is COVID, and we're going to dive deep again. So just like we did before, this was the topic. These were the areas that we want to check the boxes, and this was our score leading to, again, the composite score, the total score of 52. If I were a winery, I would take this as a wake-up call that maybe I have a little bit of work to do. Not in a critical way, just I have opportunities. If I'm going to spend my money and time against anything marketing related, I'm probably going to start with the low hanging fruit that's right on this scorecard. So in closing, so I want to give us some time to ask questions too, but just let's let this sink in for 1 minute. If you haven't given them reason to care, then they're going to move on to somebody else. If they have to work too hard to understand who you are, what you stand for, how you have protected guest safety with COVID operations and procedures, if they have to work too hard as a new customer, they're going to take a look at the next one that makes them work less hard. I hope that makes sense. That actually came from a famous author and a workshop coordinator called Donald Miller, or named Donald Miller, and he's very famous in marketing circles. He basically points out the obvious, that customers don't want to work hard. We don't, right? It's not that we want the easiest option, we just don't want to spend the energy to find the best option. Which leads us to basically the slide that ties all this together. Because remember, we talked about scoring, and the only reason you take a score on this stuff is if you want to compare yourself to everybody else. What is your competitive advantage in your market in Iowa? How do you stand out versus blend in with that? A scorecard really helps create an enduring brand because it points out the opportunities, the risks, the strengths that you have, the challenges that you might face, things that you can leverage and maintain. This is the important stuff. And when you know that, then you can single in on areas that you can improve. Okay, well now, what if you did the same exercise for your top 3 competitors? What if you knew, not in a combative way, that the winery down the street, they were starting to take some of your customers away, and you didn't feel right with that? Well, what if you were to take a look at that same scorecard and start to look at their website, their socials, their press? Then you become a little more sensitive, like, oh, okay, I understand where my 52 compares to theirs. They're up at 70. No wonder they're taking customers from me. They're offering X, whether that's a different in-person experience, a more engaging website, an easier e-commerce platform, whatever that is. It takes you actually sitting down and auditing their work in the same way that you do your own, in order to compare the two apples to apples. I don't mean to make that sound kindergarten simplistic, but who of us ever takes the time to compare ourselves to our top 3 competitors? Maybe there are some folks out there who are way ahead of me, and I applaud you if that's the case. Maybe Randy is. Chances are good that, chances are good that we just have life and business to attend to before we actually sit down with a coffee and make that kind of comparison happen. So the question from Nicole is, will you be sharing an example? I certainly can. Again, it's going to be specific to you. You're going to have different things. I can definitely send you a place to start, but don't take it as this is what I need to do. Use it as the inspiration for creating your own scorecard, and also weighting it the way that you need to weight it. In your area, your market, social might be more competitive than in other areas, or the local press really is keen to, again, a local success story, and so press might take more of a weight. So I'll forward that. Thank you, Nicole. Again, we've got from Joanne, outreach from customer emails and blog posts. A great point. Yeah, all of these things are available to us, but we're not, again, we have to prioritize our time. And so to the extent that we can send out emails and we can actually show the behind the scenes with blog posts and articles, these things not only give the new customer more of a means of attaching to the brand, but also gives the press more content when they decide to write about you. So just finishing this up, again, we've got ourselves and putting ourselves in check, and then we put our competitors in check, and then we compare the two. And hopefully what that does is identify opportunities for you really to survive and thrive, not only during a pandemic, but outside of this, when this returns back to normal. Let's use this as a springboard, maybe an opportunity for a quick self-reflection as a business and a brand, where we can propel ourselves forward, strengthen our position for when we come out of this. All of these things are very important. And I come back to the point that it doesn't make you a bad neighbor to want to grow your business and to think competitively about it. So that's what I wanted to cover today. In the couple minutes, I want to be respectful. In the couple minutes we have left, and I'm also happy to stay on the line after, but what questions did we not answer? What burning? I'm happy to talk to you about that, Joanne, offline. That works. If we missed something, what did we miss? Is there something that could immediately help you? Gerard asks if anybody else is having issues with Facebook, more specifically with boosting. Oh, in general, wow. Anybody else having problems with Facebook? Facebook just went through a mandatory interface update. So you've probably noticed that the classic interface has gone away and everybody's been forced to use, yeah, it's a good point. Yeah, Megan had made the suggestion that you can still opt out and use the classic until they force you to, but the new interface is pretty slick and they've worked out most of the bugs from what we can tell. That's not to say that it's perfect. Yeah, you know, I'll take a deeper look at the cookies issue, Gerard. I'm not sure. What other, quite a good question. What other questions do we have or suggestions that people, things that are working for you that you'd like to share in this forum with everybody else? Anything come to mind? I know it's like putting you on the spot, but I'll say this then, just in lieu of more time. Yes, Megan, I'm going to send out a recording. I'll send Megan the link to the presentation as well as the link to the recording and a template that you can really use to spur your creative juices as far as a scorecard goes. And as always, we're available to help if anyone would like us to take a look at their own efforts and make some suggestions, some recommendations. And I certainly appreciate, again, having the opportunity to present with you folks. This is fun for me. I hope that it's valuable for you.